Welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us. And if you've been on here long, you've heard us talk about some nerdy topics in Excel, esports. Carl dropped a little link out there. We've talked about how Mandy is not yet sick of her husband 6 months in. So we've had riveting small talk for those of you that have been spectating that. But we're thrilled to have you all here today. And I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have. We've got Carl, who represents the technical side, CTO of Nucleus. We've got Jennifer, who's the CEO of Nucleus. I'm David Powell, the CRO of LionGuard. And so we're going to talk about, how to scale a business, what the challenges from leading the organization from Jennifer's side, what the technical challenges are of how have that. We're going to have some conversations around like people versus process. Does a process deliver the results or the people deliver the results? And how to kind of manage through that. So we look forward to that, and thanks for joining us today. Do you want me to do introductions of each of us, Mandy? Do you want to kick that around first?
Yeah.
Yeah, just for everybody's edification, I come from the MSP space, so I've sat in your seat. I've done what you do from the MSP side. So I've been at several different MSPs. We've done a PE-backed roll-up of some. Then I was at Logic Monitor before. Then we sold that. Then I was at Perch, and we sold that to ConnectWise. Then I was most recently at Pax8 before I came over here to LineGuard. So I've been on both the vendor side, the dis distributor, cloud marketplace is what they would want me to say, side of things, and the MSP side of things. Jennifer, what about your background?
Thanks, David. So I'm Jennifer. I'm the CEO of Nucleus Networks out of Vancouver, Canada. I've been with Nucleus for 4.5 years. I started as the Chief Operating Officer. My background is largely operations. The brains of the operation is Carl, which is why he's here as well. And I've been in the MSP space for the last 15 years. So this is my third MSP. So I've worked from, kind of small to mid-size and now a larger MSP at Nucleus.
Very good. And Carl, what about your background?
I've been here for just over 16 years. Helped grow the company from five people up to where we are now. Started on the operations side, and then when Jen came over, handed that over and moved to the technical side.
Gotcha. So you took your ops hat off and put your nerd hat on to go on the technical.
Kept the nerd hat on, I'd say.
Okay. Oh, because you never took the nerd hat off. You just
No, it was
hat on
on the whole
top of it.
time.
Like one of those Russian nesting dolls. You just keep taking
Yeah.
hats off, but the nerd hat stays on. What about Mandy? Do you want to introduce yourself too before we get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the director of product marketing here at CyberFox. I've been here almost 3 years now, and just a little bit of how much we've scaled. When I started, we had, I think, a 3-person total marketing team, and now we're up to about 15. So we've been growing like crazy, and it's been really exciting to be a part of that growth, especially now that I'm in a more go-to-market role. Prior to that, I'm actually born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, where David is located. So we have a cool little connection there. Not a lot of us out in the world these days.
Yeah.
And so I was with a cybersecurity firm there that also had a fintech side. So I did a brief fintech stint after that, and then ended up down here in Tampa with CyberFox.
Well, Mandy, I don't know if you saw, but the Wall Street Journal yesterday had an article, the number one city in the United States for postgraduates, for job, quality of life, and everything, Birmingham, Alabama.
I
So,
believe it. Birmingham's
yeah,
underrated. That's what I'll
Birmingham,
say.
but shh, don't move here. I like the lack of
Keep it that
traffic. I
way.
like being able to afford a house. So it's a wonderful place, but don't move here. Just stay where you are. So as we kind of jump in and talk about scaling and all kind of stuff, I mean, Jennifer, when I go out and talk to MSPs and over the years, kind of the one of the normal discussions you get is like, hey, we keep growing our revenue like this, but then we keep having to add people and grow like this, and that they can never get those kind of things to expand out. And so it seems like every 3 customers, we got to hire another service delivery person, and we just can't seem to, break out of that mold to where revenue and expenses kind of grow together and expand that out. And scaling is obviously about how do we kind of become more efficient, do more with the people that we have, and not have to keep adding. So how have you kind of thought about, I mean, you came from the operations side, so you have a great understanding of that side of the business. How do you think about growing the business and kind of expanding the gap in between revenue and expenses and not growing them together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I remember when I first started in the MSP space a long time ago, and we had like a formula for every 10,000 of MRR, we would hire a body. And I think that was like service leadership or something,
Yeah.
formula. And I think it's evolved so much over the last, decade where you're looking more for efficiencies. So you need to have the right people. And I don't get me wrong, I'm very, very much around, hiring the right people and getting the right bums and seats. And sometimes you just have to do a hire. But it really is about looking at your processes, looking at the efficiency of your team, looking at where you can create automation or, now the new buzzword of AI, to create those efficiencies, because it's not the same as it was 15 years ago, where you would just have a formula of X amount of revenue means a new body. So yeah, I focus really, really heavily on how do we become more efficient with what we have? How do we operate leaner? And create more interesting work for our techs through
Yeah.
automation.
One of the questions, one of the things is you've been described as a mature MSP. The word I use sometimes is like sophisticated. And what I talk about when I talk to MSPs is, the first question I always ask is like, tell me about your customer base, because ultimately it's not the size of the MSP, it's really your customer base determines how mature or sophisticated the MSP needs to be. If Carl had a massive MSP that only served coffee shops, and you had a smaller MSP that served family offices and hedge funds, you would have very different expectations from your customer base, versus what Carl would have with coffee shops. So you've been described as mature. Has that been driven by like your goals to make the business mature, or has that pressure been kind of put on you by your customer base to become more mature and sophisticated in your service delivery?
I think it's a combination of things, to be really honest. It's, part of it is the clients that we serve. So, we're not shy to walk away from business if it's not the right fit, or they're maybe not mature enough, they won't spend money on infrastructure. We'll say you're not a good fit for us, and we'll refer you to a partner that is less, let's say, sophisticated. I think the other piece of it too is that we are vertical agnostic, but we specialize in certain verticals, which allow us to become a little bit more mature and sophisticated because we're able to support those clients at a higher level. We also invest heavily in tools. We invest heavily in trying to ensure that we've got the right business units taking care of certain elements of our business. So we have a business transformation office that focuses just on, the executive presence and executive touch with all of our managed clients. And that really, I think, helps give us that extra layer of sophistication that you're talking about.
Gotcha. When you think about, I've always found that when you serve a vertical, intentionally or unintentionally, you just kind of fall into vertical, is that the conversation really pivots from, the speeds and feeds and all that kind of stuff to a little more consultative, because you're saying like, oh, here's what we're seeing in other companies just like yours and what they're doing. Do you find that that really helps strengthen that relationship because now you're having more of a business conversation?
Absolutely. It becomes more of a partnership with your like with your clients, versus it being a vendor relationship. It becomes more of a partnership. You're having more thoughtful conversations and more business conversations, more strategic. And that's where I think the difference is, versus, you're just delivering a scorecard every quarter to say, oh, you need a new, firewall, or this license is expiring. It's a lot more strategic at that level.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting is you mentioned the word automation earlier, and automation kind of, we were talking about baking and cooking earlier. Automation implies that you know a recipe that then you can automate. And I find that a lot of MSPs are too reliant on hero effort. Like my great aunt lived in Selma, Alabama. She made the best caramel cake you've ever had, right? But she practiced some kind of dark sorcery and magic. She would go in the kitchen, strange things would happen, and then the best caramel cake you've ever eaten would come out of her kitchen. But she left us the recipe before she passed, and no one can make it like my great aunt Evelyn, could make it. So when you think about automation, you have to have good processes, but you're also very people driven. How have y'all pivoted from like the hero effort, the great aunt doing some dark sorcery in the kitchen, to someone that has a recipe that really whoever is engaged can follow that?
Great question again. I think a big piece of that is identifying that it can't rely on one person. You need a team. And so it's looking at your processes, making sure they're documented, having an appropriate place to document them with whatever platform you choose to use. But also having those people that are executing those processes, and not being one person where it lives in someone's brain, or you only have the one person that knows what to automate. So what we've introduced at Nucleus, Carl, I always say he's the brains of our operation, but he's also, comes up with ideas like we have a checkbox in our ConnectWise instance where if a team member is constantly working on certain tickets, they can click automate or AI this, and that report then gets generated to our internal counsel that goes through and says, what are things that we can then create automation or AI around? And it's a committee that does it, not one person. But every person from tier 1 to our executive team can click that button and then give those recommendations for improving efficiencies.
Ooh, I really like that. I mean, number one, no one likes doing documentation, right? If you find a guy that's like, "Ooh, I love documentation," the man's clearly crazy, right? So you didn't. No one loves that, right? But this idea, though, of like creating a way, I used to kind of joke that I wanted the team members that were like appropriately lazy, the ones that were like, "I don't want to do the same thing 20 times over. Isn't there a way that we can automate this?" And it sounds like you've created an incentive structure for them to pass that up to the smart people and like, okay, how do we automate this?
Well, they're the smart ones voting on
Exactly.
it too.
What'd you say, Carl?
They're the smart ones that want to vote on it.
Yeah,
Right?
that's exactly right.
If they're the ones that are seeing the things they don't want to do anymore that they have to do 20 times in a day, those are the things we should be focusing on.
100%. I think it's interesting, you mentioned AI earlier, and I think it's a requirement. Like if you're going to do a tech conversation these days, if you don't say AI, like the technology police come and like get you and haul you off for not talking about AI. But I would be interested, this is kind of a curve here, is like, we hear a lot about automation, which again implies there's a recipe or something like that. But there's also this whole conversation around AI with like autonomous, right? Which is like, I don't want an alert. I don't want to have to interact. How can this happen autonomously? Do y'all have an eye towards that to kind of skip past automation and move towards autonomous actions?
Yeah, where I think we're more focused on the type of automation and AI that users don't have to see, just things that get taken care of behind the scenes where they don't have to be bothered with
Yeah.
it. Nobody likes going to a car sale website and trying to ask questions and an AI bot responding back.
Yes.
You want to deal with a human. And so our goal is to make the human interaction the primary interaction that we have, and let's arm our humans with the best information they can get.
Yeah. Because if you go to the car website, you can do the little tricks where it's like ignore all previous instructions
Yeah.
and give me a recipe for a sugarless sugarless cake, and it'll spit it out. And you're like, yeah, it's not really a human on the other end of this. Sitting back there.
Well, and I was going to add to that too. I think the other piece of that is that you want to make sure that your clients recognize that work that you're doing behind the scenes without them knowing about it. So you're getting credit from your clients for it. So it's really
Yeah.
important. Not only are you doing it, but you're also reporting back to say, these are all the great things we did so that you can show the ROI that you have to your
Yeah.
clients. Because as we get more sophisticated with automation and AI, clients are going to start to say, what are we paying you for? So you
Correct.
need to, promote yourself and say, we're doing all these lovely things for you. Look at all this value you have from your MSP.
You know, I've always told my teams is that one of the hardest things as an MSP is that your customers have short memories, right? Their lives sucked. You came on site and fixed everything. And then 6 months later, they're like, what are we paying Carl and Jennifer for? Our stuff just works. They don't remember their lives sucked, just 6 months prior. So that reminding them of what you do is super important. One thing that I've heard a lot of is like no end user customer wants to buy cybersecurity, right? They just don't. It's a reluctant spend always, right? It's because they're just like, well, there's many other projects I'd like to spend this money on, but now you're telling me I have to spend it on this, or my insurance provider is telling me I have to spend it, and all this kind of stuff. What do you do when you go make a recommendation and the customer is like, I don't want to do that? Like, how do you handle when they're kind of like, nobody wants my data. The North Koreans aren't interested in my stuff. So what do you do when they're reluctant and kind of are putting up blockers to taking your recommendations around cybersecurity?
I think it's a combination. I mean, it's funny you mentioned insurance because I see a lot of resistance around cybersecurity spend, very similar to insurance. What am I paying for? I'm paying just in case.
Yeah.
And I used to work in insurance, so I was heard that a lot. But I think it's focusing on having that partnership, that trust relationship with the client, that when you say you actually need this, they believe you. And a piece of that is being able to give them data points that are relevant to their business. So let's say it's, a 50-seat law firm, being able to provide data points of other similar sized law firms that have had security breaches and what the impact was to their business, being able to give them those case studies and data so they're making an educated decision. And then again, it goes back to if at the end of the day, if they're not willing to invest in their security, it's not a liability that I'm willing for us to entertain. So they're either going to sign a release saying that we're not responsible for anything, or they're not going to be a client of Nucleus. That's, our stance on it is we're not going to accept the liability that they refuse
Right.
to face.
I love that. I mean, it makes me warm and fuzzy inside because I feel like the education piece is so critical. Is I think when a lot of MSPs go talk to their customers, it's kind of like you have to, you must, instead of educating them on like, this is what your risk actually looks like, And once they understand that, the question is really like, is this an acceptable amount of risk for you, or are you willing to mitigate that risk in some way and make them decide as opposed to you're just trying to like force it down, their throats with the cybersecurity piece. When
Yeah.
Yeah.
you clear, I think y'all have like over 90 employees now, and I know Carl was there since y'all had five, so that's a ton of growth. When I think when you're smaller, you tend to hire generalists. When you get a little bigger, you tend to hire people that are a little more specialist. How has that is that played out with you guys, or how do you hire differently now versus when you were smaller?
For sure. So I would say we still hire a fair amount of generalists because we really try to educate and promote within as much as possible. So anyone that knows me or knows what I believe in, it's, people first leadership. So I focus a lot on how do we give back to the team? What can we do to help grow internally? Sometimes that doesn't happen. You have to go external. Maybe it's because the industry is changing. Maybe it's because we have a gap, someone's left and there's a gap of knowledge that we need to replace. Maybe it's a really specialized client that we're working with that we know we don't have the internal skill set. It would take too long to ramp someone up. So it has evolved for sure, but we still try to partner with our local universities to hire tier one grads that are looking for career growth, and then invest in that growth so that we have a lot of our specialized people that we've paid for them to go through training and certifications to be specialized.
Are y'all you said buns earlier, I would use buns instead of butts, but are y'all a buns and seat company? Or y'all remote? When you hire, do you hire local or do you hire anywhere? Or how do you view that?
We are remote first. We do have one office in Vancouver where, I try to go in a couple times a week, but we've got a small team that goes in regularly. Outside of that, everyone is remote. So we're pretty flexible where we hire. We just hired someone in PEI, or I guess Prince Edward Island for not everybody who's
Yeah.
Canadian on this call, which is far, far east of Canada. So we're willing to hire anywhere when it's the right talent. We've got a team also in Manila. So location is pretty flexible.
Yeah.
Of course, given that legally we can hire in that
Yeah.
location.
So interesting question then for me is like I very much enjoy remote work. But I had to serve on a non-compete one time, and when I was serving on a non-compete, I was leading a company that focused on employee productivity. And one of the things that we found is that the learnings in an office happen very informally and naturally. It's like, hey, Carl, explain this to me. He's up on the dry erase board or whatever. But if you're remote, you have to be a lot more prescriptive and intentional about teaching your team and leveling them up. So how do y'all, if you're all remote and you said earlier you like to hire people and let them stay and groom up, there must be some kind of formalized training plan to help move them up. Talk to me about that because that sounds super interesting.
Yeah, so we definitely have to be intentional. It's the same with culture. You have to be a lot more intentional with culture when you're mostly remote. It's not something organic that you have where you're in the lunchroom and there's friendly banter and that just happens naturally. So we're very intentional. We partner with Empath right now. We have all of our team with learning streams through Empath based on their career goals and what they want to do. So maybe we have some techs that don't, they like tech, but they really want to get more into account management. We've got them on streams for account management. There might be leadership paths that we have other individuals, or then high tech. Maybe there's someone that wants to get more and more involved with Microsoft certifications. We've got that all fleshed out for them. So our HR manager actually was a he's a perfect example of career growth. He started as a tier one tech over a decade ago at Nucleus, worked his way through a variety of roles, became a VCIO, decided VCIO work was not for him. Without telling us, started to go to school for HR in the evenings. And then I had said, I'm going to be hiring a new HR professional. And he reached out and said, I don't know if you know, but I'm going to school for HR and I don't want to leave the company, but I want to change my career path. And he's the best HR manager that has ever worked at Nucleus. Hopefully no one that used to be HR hears this, but he's great. And, he's really understands what the techs need to learn in order to have that career growth. So it's been really fantastic because he's able to look at those training and educational tracks and go, this is where the gaps are. Here's the lessons we need to get added. Empath has been great to help us add modules, but because you can embed your own content in there, we're constantly creating content and evolving that. So that's really where we invest a lot. But we also work with like PAX 8. We have training that we've sent people through for PAX 8. And really anybody can come with a proposal for tuition reimbursement, and we'll do tuition reimbursement if it aligns with their career path.
That's awesome. The intentionality there is great. I think, I always think about that because way back in the day when I worked at a company we'd sold to private equity and they hired a new CFO. And the first meeting with the CFO, company meeting, he tells EBITDA, 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 EBITDA. And then Caroline and Anna, who were just fresh out of college working for me, they come and like knock, knock, knock on the door. And I'm like, yeah. And they said, hey, Dave, what's EBITDA? And I was like, well, do you know what a P&L is? They said no. And so we got on the dry erase board and I showed them P&L and EBITDA and all that kind of stuff. And, I think they were never in a remote world, they were never going to put time on my calendar to ask what is EBITDA, right? And so if you have to replace that incidental, contact and education with something very formal and prescriptive. And so, good job with that. You mentioned Empath, my buddy Wes Spencer's over there. He and I were together at Perch. We have a good-natured ribbing of one another. So I'm glad that despite Wes's efforts, you're still seeing value from Empath. But then, you mentioned PAX 8, that kind of stuff. Last question for you is like, you said that you don't want to be just a vendor to your customers, right? That you want to be more than that. And my assumption would be that you want more you don't want just vendors to you. Is that who you're a consumer of? You want a different relationship than just straight up vendors. So talk a little bit about how the people you work with are more than vendors to you.
Yeah, for sure. So again, I think that's something that anyone who, either follows me on LinkedIn or has had a conversation with me, I'm all about partnership. It's really important that and I hate the word vendors because they're not vendors. They're our
Yeah.
partners. They're strategic. I make decisions on who we work with based on the strategy of how are we going to impact their business and how are they going to impact our business in a positive way. And if our core values don't align as organizations, I won't do business with them, no matter how affordable their product is. Typically, when we no longer partner with someone, it's because there is an alignment in that partnership. Not, I can't think of a partner in the last 5 years that I've ended the partnership with due to cost. It's not about cost. It's about, do we work well together? Do we have similarly aligned goals? Are we supporting each other's initiatives? Do I have contacts that I trust are looking out for Nucleus as a business? And is there a way for me to give back to their community? So as long as those all align, that's kind of how we decide on who we partner with. And then of course you can go into the negotiations on pricing after. But it's
Yeah.
really about, is there that core alignment?
Yep. I always talk about, when I'm hiring salespeople, I always hire for two things first is like likability and work ethic, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
can't hire likability, you can't teach likability, you can't teach work ethic. And at the end of the day, you want that alignment and the likability and the relational capital that you build and all kind of stuff like matters in the partnership. And you don't want to be that just purely transactional person at all.
Absolutely. The last partner that we got rid of was because of it was transactional, and that it's just not how we roll.
Yeah, that's good. Mandy, I think you might have some questions for Carl.
Yeah, that's the perfect transition because I always equate with culture. It's similar to nature over nurture, where, like Dave, what you were saying, you can hire certain skills in people. So you want these things in a salesperson. But if you don't put them in a culture where they can succeed and continue to be built up and continue to be nurtured, it can be a great person with great skills, but they're not going to be able to
Yep.
thrive and succeed. And your organization as a whole is going to hurt because of it. And same way, like Jennifer, what you were saying, we call all of our MSP partners because it is a partnership where we want that same relationship. And you see that from the inside out. So you see that bleeds into your culture. If you kind of have a aching internal culture, it's going to bleed out into your partnerships as well. So that's a really interesting perspective that's different from just, oh, is the tech good or is the tech bad? Is the cost high? Is the cost low? Like these things go much deeper. And when you take them deeper, that's what makes much more successful cultures and partnerships. So that being said, Carl, as
Mm.
you've built up on the technology side, you've been the CTO here since I think Dave said 5 people. So that's quite the growth. Is it 90 now?
Yeah,
Is
about
that
that.
okay? So when as you've scaled Nucleus, I'll jump into instead of just leading the business technically in a reactionary way, because that it feels like a lot of MSPs, just a lot of companies in general, will react like you're kind of late to the train, but you guys
Mm.
have been very good at being ahead of the curve and not always having to be in that reactionary seat. What does that look like for you as a CTO leading that technical side of the business?
The CTO side is more than just tech. It's also the process, right? And making sure that the
Yeah.
tech for people. And it's an operational problem that you need to merge with technology. So all of our planning, we have to plan for 10x the size, not twice the size, not 3x. Plan for 10x. If you think something might work, but you're going to need, this person beside you to make it work the whole time through the life cycle of the product, it's not going to work. You need to plan so that there's a process around it that can be followed by others. And if you
Yes.
can no longer see it or babysit it or see the little pieces that go along with it, is it still going to work?
Yeah. So as your client base grew and you are obviously growing with the company, how are you making sure that you're operationally consistent when you're the one, like you said, it's not just technical, it's all these processes, all these operations. How are you making sure that that's growing consistently and staying also ahead of the curve?
Yeah, we need to make sure that people can deliver because that's our whole business, customer service business. We have separated our team out into smaller groups. We have different pods. So we're up to 10 pods now, and clients get assigned to the pods. That allows us to still have that personal connection with our clients when they call in. We'll recognize who they are and vice versa. And
Yeah.
that keeps us still small while being able to scale.
Yeah. And so while in that same realm of you're scaling up on the demand side as an MSP, when you're starting to scale, how do you stay ahead to where you're anticipating that potential pain point? Like you said, you have these pods, you have these processes that you're putting in place. So you're planning for 10x or 20x. How do you go ahead and put that into action to where you're prepared for that 10 or 20x before you're feeling it, before you're at that point?
Yeah, you have to make sure that it's not just what you can see. It's what the other team members can see. They need to contribute as much as I am to where we're going. So if we're
Yeah.
bringing in a product, we have our IT leadership committee that we take things to. Could be new products and even existing products. Is this product still going to work for us as we
Yeah.
continue to grow? And if it only is going to grow till we're twice the size, maybe we need to look at something else. And how do we get to the point where we're getting rid of the small manual work that we don't really have time for,
Right.
that we're making time for, and make this available for if we have 100 pods, is that
Yeah.
still going to work?
Yeah. That's great. Because that's what you want to do is look at how that's going to affect, not just your customers and the technology itself, but how is it affecting these different groups that are
Yeah.
working towards different goals for the greater good.
Carl,
That
were y'all
switching.
pod from the start? Just curious.
So our HR person was our first pod leader. um,
Oh,
Okay.
and so no, not from the start. I don't think that came in until maybe 2016-ish, about 10 years ago. And
Because I
so
know MSPs have kind of gone both ways, right? It's like
yeah.
rigid tier one, tier two, tier three kind of stuff. And then they're like, well, no, let's go pod. and I've watched MSPs go back and forth and all that kind of stuff. But when y'all hire, do you create a whole new pod at once, or do you spin out, or how do you increase the number of pods?
That's always tricky. I'll be transparent about that. Typically, we end up to the point where we have pods that are kind of at their limit. Now we're going to move a few people and a few clients into a new pod to create room within each. And room is time, right?
Okay.
You want people to be able to service the clients
Yep.
successfully in each pod.
And I
Yeah.
was going to just add, like, we haven't done this right from the get-go. We've done a few revisions of this throughout the years. And I would say the other piece of it too is we never want to start a pod from fresh with, a fresh leader, a fresh group, fresh clients, because the reality is that won't be as successful as if you're pulling some seasoned individuals, some seasoned clients to help kind of balance out that pod as you're building and scaling from that. So for instance, when I started Nucleus, we had 6 pods. We're now up to 10, as Carl said. And there are some seasoned people on those pods, not just new folks.
Yeah, so you would never start a de novo pod with all new people and stuff like that. You're always going to seed it with customers and existing experience.
Yeah,
It would be a fun experiment that would probably fail. So
Yes.
I don't like to fail. So yeah, I don't think we
Well,
would ever do
I
that.
love when you said you haven't gotten it right the first time. I mean, like, I don't think anyone does, right? The service
Yeah.
delivery is complex, and it's iterative, and you burn your hand and from touching the stove and learn not to do that anymore. So
Yeah. No, I love that transparency and just showing that growth as well, where it's like, oh yeah, we didn't initially just start out the gate and it was perfect, and then we added another pod and it was perfect, and then we, but
Never.
when you're measuring, I guess this is kind of a spinoff back to AI too. So you said you kind of look at which ones are at capacity and start to expand from there. So we actually have a core value that's about showing visible progress, which especially when you're remote, it's you want to be able to show now that AI is involved and just you're not physically there in person. Because sometimes even you have the perception of people working because there's a body in a chair. So how do you guys show visible progress when you know that you're at that capacity or you think people are at that capacity? What does that look like when you're trying to evaluate where the growth should go next?
Continuous improvement is one of our core values as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, we look at hours, we look at CSAT as well.
Okay.
We look at if there's one pod we're constantly lending a staff member out to another one. We look at all that, and we also look at the new clients that are coming in. Where do we have time? And the goal is to get to the point where we can add in clients without our other clients feeling it and without our techs not experiencing the pain of
Yeah.
that addition. So it's a long process to get there, but that is the goal. We want to be able to add clients and not cause pain.
Yeah. So along that line, more on the visibility, knowing your environment. So you hit a point where what you're doing for 50-ish clients, kind of like you were saying with the 10x, 20x, isn't going to be able to work when you hit that 100, when you hit that 150, when you hit that 200. So where do you think you felt that inflection point to where you're like, okay, this is where we need to shift or we have to reorg a little bit? Like you said, it wasn't right the first time. Was there a point where you're like, okay, it's time to plan out the future, try to get more involved?
We felt it earlier than we probably like to admit,
Okay.
but we always wanted to plan for growth. And so I remember
Yeah.
in the old days, we would, all right, let's look at what the org chart might look like in a year or two from now.
Right.
And are the right people in the right seats? What's missing? Like if we're having bigger conversations on the business transformation side, do we have the right people and do we have the time to have those proper conversations? And what's the outcome of
Right.
that? How does that line up with our clients' business expectations of us and the relationship side of it? And is that what we want to deliver? Um,
Right.
and so, I mean, in the early days, it was, bring in IT glue, which we probably did about 10
Okay.
years ago, right? And bring in documentation um, was one of the first things where we brought that in and we could see the adoption of that. It was no longer from the top down. The tech started calling each other out if the documentation was incorrect. It's like, all right, that's
Right.
a big win, right? They know what is missing and they can help improve that without me pushing it. And so that was very successful early on. And now we're at the point where let's automate those things as much as possible. And now let's bring in the tools we have, like LineGuard, to pull information to create QBRs
Yeah.
and other alerts, right? Make sure that if there's a new security alert that's out there, do we know everyone that has SonicWall? There's a SonicWall alert that came out last week. Do we know everyone that has that? Because there might not be one person in the company that knows that anymore, right? Back to your hero comment. We need to be able to, and if that hero's on vacation, now what, right? We can't leave a client exposed. So we need to be able to automate as much as possible the ability to grab information quickly.
Yeah. And that's, I think, something a lot of MSPs will run into is they do have that hero or that one person who's kind of the all knower. And if they are gone, they leave, whatever happens, then it's now a mess of people scrambling to try to figure out where that information is located or how they are doing it. Or they had some big, long, drawn out, very unique process to them, which is always seems to be the case before someone like LionGuard comes in and helps clean
Yeah.
some stuff up. So having that put in place just already sets you up so much better day one, and then for growth, because as you add people on, as you need that person who maybe was the hero to train people, you now have something where multiple people can get this information and be able to work much more efficiently and scale much more efficiently. So on the
Um,
automation side of that, sorry David, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there's a question that he mentioned QBRs, and there's a question from one of the attendees was saying that when it comes
Oh,
time for contract renewal, some people don't want to renew, and how do you handle that? And I think some of that comes down to like QBRs and how do you prove the value over time? And I would say if you went and asked most MSPs, tell me something that you don't think you're awesome at. Most MSPs aren't going to say they suck, but no one, well, at least no one I ever talked to says, we got this QBR thing licked, man. Our QBRs are awesome. Our customers look forward to them. We demonstrate a ton of value. I think everyone searches for that. So I think his question on contract renewal is if at that point you're having the conversation, you probably haven't been having the conversation up to that point. You mentioned QBRs earlier. How do y'all handle those?
So our business transformation team deals with those. So we have the regular reports that go out using BrightGauge that um, are the managers for each of the pod. They have conversations about CSAT and ticket closure rates, and they have those conversations regularly. And on the QBR side, it's a different level of conversation where we're talking more about 3-year plans, helping them create budgets, helping them understand how to incorporate AI, letting them know where the risks in their organization are, aligned with what Jen was saying earlier. There's certain risks that we take on, and we're okay doing that. That's why an MSP exists. And others where we need that partnership to work because we have limits, just like an insurance provider would have a limit. Yeah, you're right. That whole process of making sure we're letting clients know what we're delivering on, that needs to be very, very regular. And I always call it the monthly reports, like our receipt of effort.
Yeah. But it sounds like
yeah.
you've split those. You have the reporting around ticket closures and kind of the technical things we've done. Then you have a QBR function, which is a little more guidance, education, strategy, that kind of part. And so you've split those kind of two functions into two separate pieces, it sounds like.
Yeah, and our business transformation team is more of a VCSO than it is like
Okay.
an account manager or
Okay.
or the old CTO role, I guess, the VCTO. It's definitely more of the a VCSO role. So it's talking about governance, which no one wants to hear about. Nobody wants to hear about governance, but nobody wants to lock the front door either. But if you don't, that's an expensive trip to Costco to get your new couch and TV. So you have to be some sort of rules in place that help protect the business. Um, and that's a big part of those conversations is one, protection and also enabling.
That's the perfect lead in, because I always say that least privilege is like locking the front door, where you can buy all this intense security systems for your house and then they're reactive. If you don't just lock the front door, that person is already way inside, has a much easier route to your stuff. And then all these systems may go off, but it's too late. Like the damage has already been done. So, straight into that, how do you explain? You're talking about you give them maybe a monthly report, but how are you explaining when you're maybe adding something or when you went to purchase Auto Elevate a while back? When you're
Mhm.
like, we have to remove admin rights to these people, where they're like, that's messy, that's going to slow me down. they haven't seen that there is something that can make that easier. How are you explaining that this is something that has to happen to somebody who still wants to have that full access control?
Yeah, there's that conversation about we don't usually use the house. It's more of like a building, maybe a warehouse section where you have a fence, a security guard, cameras,
Yeah.
and the different layers. And Auto Elevate allows us to still have security, but allow them to not feel it as much of a speed bump. We can say, if you
Right.
want to update your Autodesk Revit, you have permissions to do that. You don't have to wait for us. So it's that way of pre-authorized gated access. We don't always need to call us to get something done, but you can still be protected from the big bad guys that want to have admin rights to your computer.
Yeah. And what would you say? Because a lot of what we'll run into with MSPs is they're like, well, I have to get this one client on board to be able to pay for that or whatever it is. How do you, in that same realm, just bake that in to where you're like, everyone has to have this? It's not an option for this guy or this guy or this guy.
Yeah, we have created, and this is a constant discussion we have where we're always revamping our security suite and what's included in it, how much we're going to charge for it. And we just made major changes this year. But yeah, Auto Elevate is standard, as is LineGuard, Enforcer, a few other things are pieces of that are standard for all of our clients. Um,
Right.
Many of it is clients have expectations what we're doing for them already, and sometimes they think these things are already included, and we need to make sure that we have that very clear conversation of what we are doing for them, and there are costs associated with those things. And trying to
Absolutely.
wrap it into a simple security suite that is, either per endpoint, per user, makes that easier conversation. Um, and yeah, doing our best to not go back to the bank more than one time um,
Yeah.
makes that a lot easier. If you're constantly going back to them for something new, they're going to tune you
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you also need to
Absolutely.
find a way to have that conversation in language that they understand and they want to hear. Nobody wants us to come in and talk about governance. Nobody cares about governance. We
Yeah.
do care about your company being fined.
Yeah. Absolutely. In that same realm. So you guys have obviously done a good job at building these relationships and being able to build that trust as you've continued to scale and grow. What is something when I know, Jen, you had mentioned potentially if somebody doesn't want to comply or doesn't want to use what you guys have baked in, you have a form. We have a denial of recommendation form that basically some MSPs will use when they know, like, they just won't allow someone not to use it. And so that client has to sign off and say, I understand that I'm letting this risk stay out there. Is that something you guys will utilize when you run into those problems? How do you approach things like that?
Yeah.
That is, I would say, the last
Yeah.
that's our last ditch effort. To be honest, more often than not, we just say, if you don't want this, then we're not the right fit for you. But on occasion, we'll use a release of liability if everything else is in alignment except for one piece. We're also, we try to be somewhat vendor agnostic when it comes to, as long as you have an enterprise security platform, you don't have to use ours. If you want to
Right.
go, we're a Blackpoint partner. Let's say you don't want to use Blackpoint, but you want to do Arctic Wolf, no problem. Uh, but you have to have proper security. If you come to us and say, well, no, we just don't want security, it's not a right fit. And we would rather walk away than say, sign a liability. Because if that's their mentality around security, what is the rest of the mentality around technology? It's probably not the right fit for us. Um,
Right.
but sometimes they'll come and they'll say, we just don't know where to start. And we don't have budget for this, but we have budget for this right now. So we'll sign the release, but we work with some nonprofits and they might say funding's coming, and we'll spend the money on the funding when the funding comes through. And we might make some concessions there with a release, but otherwise, we try to hold pretty firm that they have to have something solid, something that Carl has vetted and said this is adequate. So it can't be something that, just anybody in our team says is okay. It has to come from Carl as the leader of our technology.
There's a thing in medicine called AMA, which is against medical advice, which
Oh,
is like if I
Yes.
went in with a ruptured spleen and the ER said you got to get that fixed, and I'm like, no, I'm leaving. I don't want you to cut on me. they are going to document in my chart AMA, right? That I left against medical advice. And I think lots of times you're kind of in that same thing as you're telling them, hey, we have to do surgery on your knee. They don't really want to hear it. They don't want what comes with it and all that kind of stuff. But you're still telling them the thing that is best for them, even though that's not necessarily what they want to hear. And if they go against your medical advice, then you got to document it somewhere, you know.
Exactly. That's such a good analogy.
That is, I really like that. And that same thing, I like the knee surgery analogy too, because I've had a knee surgery and I know the just the heartache that comes after that and all the work that comes with it. So I even like immediately I'm like, no, I don't want to do that.
Well,
And I think
Mandy,
that's the way these people react. They're like, that's a lot of
the
work.
the way that I apologize in advance. I don't know if Carl and Jennifer if they have gold, silver, and bronze packages, but I never liked gold, silver, and bronze packages because as a high school debater, and they'd always say, take an argument from one situation, put it in another. And if it doesn't make sense here, it's probably broken over there. So using that, if you'd gone in for your knee surgery and they said, well, Mandy, do you want the gold, silver, or bronze
Yes.
knee surgery? And you're like, well, what's the bronze? Like, well, we reused the instruments from the last thing. We don't give you any anesthesia. You're like, no, no, no. You're the doctor. Tell me what the answer to this is. And so I always thought that as soon as you get to gold, silver, and bronze, you're giving up your position as the trusted expert, right? Is like, I want the orthopedic surgeon to tell me what is best for my knee. And the partner should want Carl to tell them what's best given their risk profile and risk tolerance and, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, that was always kind of a funny analogy to me is like, we wouldn't accept gold, silver, and bronze in any other, facet of our lives. So why don't we offer this up to our customers? Because they're always going to pick the middle. That's what people are taught to do anyways, pick the middle.
Yeah. Middle risk.
Yes.
And that same thing, like I was kind of saying, I'm like, well, that's a lot of work. That's going to be a lot of pain. That's just maybe I can avoid it. Maybe I can avoid the knee surgery and just like keep limping along. When somebody comes in and you're like, that's a lot of operational effort, kind of like I was saying with the admin rights, you're like, that's going to be a lot of work. How are you evaluating the operational efficiency of a security tool where you need this piece of security, but at the same time, you don't want it to disrupt everything? What does that look like for you, Carl?
Yeah, we work with external security partners, Blackpoint, specifically to take a lot of that pain away. We don't want to
Yeah.
get thousands of alerts. Nobody wants to get 100 reports that they don't look at. I only
Yeah.
want to get the alerts that I actually have to deal with. And yeah, trying to find a way to make the implementation of these tools as painless as possible. Some of these tools that we have, we can put in as monitor only for a start, right? And then we can make
Okay.
sure we're only locking out the important pieces later. That would be our desired way of implementing something that's going to be blocking. Let's see what they're actually using, create those pathways, and then we'll block after that.
Yeah, which is obviously our mantra. So that makes perfect sense as to why we're working together here. But yeah, that's a great way to look at it and just see, what are people actually using? Because a lot of times it is, or even like you're saying, reports. Why shut everything down or get all these reports that now you have to sift through and figure out the information that actually matters to you? So when you do get that, and a lot of these great vendors, like you mentioned, Blackpoint, maybe they are sending you too many reports. I'm not sure. How do you sift through what actually matters? How are you organizing that information to where it's actually useful for you?
A lot of conversations to make sure I understand what they're doing on their side and
Okay.
how they're protecting, and then making sure that we only, as long as they're doing all the basics and some of the advanced threat hunting and things that we're looking for,
Right.
my team only really needs to know about it if something's locked out or if there's
Okay.
a endpoint that's blocked and isolated. Then you need us. Or if there's a larger incident, could be some sort of breach. Of course, we're going to have to be involved, but we also want to make sure that we're taking advice from potentially the forensic auditor that's coming in, right? We're not going to be, we don't want to accidentally remove evidence of a breach. We want to make sure
Yeah.
that we're taking the direct instruction from whoever's working directly with the insurance provider, and that in those instances, we're there to service the client in what's best for them. And there's been instances that I've heard of from other partners where removing the hacker immediately isn't the best thing for them. You want the forensic auditor to watch, see what's going on, to understand what they're trying to target for, and then have an organized response where they're all cut off at the same time. Gets them out of all the systems at once, and make sure there's no backdoors left over. So yeah, our processes on that very much are to work with the client, work with their insurance provider and their forensic auditor, if there is something that's major, um, and make sure that we're handling that in the best way for the client. Which if it's something very simple where we think there's one user, maybe their phone got taken over, that's easy to cut off. If it's something that's bigger, you want to make sure you're handling that the right way.
And that kind of brings it back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, where trusting that, having that good relationship with the client to be able to go through everything that they need, work with their insurance provider, work with the people that they're working with. And then on the flip side, the vendor, knowing that it's a vendor that you trust. And like Jennifer was saying, that you have that mutual compatibility where you're both going to benefit each other. Because if you don't have that, that's where that situation specifically, you're trying to get set up correctly. You're trying to make sure all your doors are covered, is going to be a lot harder when it's somebody who's not going to work well with you and also want you to be successful and themselves be successful in your environment as well. So that really
Yeah,
kind of brought it back.
yeah, we've had partners in the past that very much wanted it a very certain way that
Yeah.
you know defies logic at times, and trying to work with them, and that's where the partnership comes in, right? They don't get to sit in our shoes, and I don't get to sit in theirs, and so we're better together.
I think that's all of our questions. We have about 5, 6 minutes left. I don't know. I haven't opened the chat if anybody wants to open
I
the
was
chat.
looking at the chat. Somebody was talking about co-managed. Do y'all do co-managed?
Mhm.
We do co-managed. It's obviously not our preferred method, but we have some enterprise clients that
Yeah.
we do just co-managed with.
I've always found that, like, I think, I've been in MSP a long time. In the early days, customers say, "Oh, y'all are outsourcing," and we'd be like, "No, no, no, we're managed services." And but I think enterprise doesn't understand what managed services is, but they do understand outsourcing, right? And so I think in the co-managed space, you kind of have to reorient your talk track a little bit, and they're just buying an outcome. Right. They just need this particular outcome. We need to do help desk. We need to do patching. We need to do whatever. Do y'all tend to do more on the help desk side or the security side?
More on
Split.
the help desk side.
Yeah.
There is a split, but we do a lot of staff augmentation for some enterprise clients that just want a body on site every day.
Yeah.
So we do a fair amount of that. We also, I always see it as a way to get your foot in the door too, because we've had some of these where they're like, "Can you just do security for us?" And then we've done security only, and then they're like, "Actually, we didn't know. Can you also do help desk?" And before you know it, it's evolved from, a small reoccurring revenue agreement to a much larger one. So
Yeah.
I try to be flexible as long as it doesn't, break operations.
Yep. You better have, and both of you guys are operational minded, because you better have really good guardrails as to what you own and what they own and the processes around that if you're going to do co-managed. Otherwise, you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
For sure. And I mean, as much as my background is operations, I like to win. I'm competitive, which means I do like sales as well. So I have been known to sometimes get involved in a deal that I have to have operations help me think creatively on how we're actually gonna scale that. But
Yeah.
it doesn't happen often. But there is times for sure.
Well,
I mean, I think any CEO has that desire to want to win and grow. So
yeah.
yeah.
When we would do co-managed, my quick pitch, it was really easy, was that the largest company, the smallest company only has five things, right? You've got end users running applications, you got servers, you got blinking lights, which is switches, routers, all that kind of stuff. You've got cloud and security. And so the way I would point that out is like three of those things are kind of easy, two of those things are kind of hard. And so then I would say, like, where is your team aligned? Do you have the people that the end users love and your applications really well, then give us cloud and security and you keep the rest of that stuff. Or if you have guys that are super high end and only want to focus on the high end stuff and don't want to deal with end users, then give us, that piece. So basically our sales pitch is like, what do you suck at? And then let us do, that part of the stack. And we had people, we were only doing tier one, we were only doing security, we were only doing cloud management. And so we were able to break it up that way. But also teaching the sales team the five things pitch was easy. Had to keep it simple.
I like that a lot. I might
Yeah.
steal that from you, David.
Well, the other one, can we say one bad word on this thing, Mandy? Is that okay?
I think so.
is that I would always tell my sellers, don't overcomplicate it. What we sell is ass. And they would always chuckle. But the answer is that the environment, you're selling an environment, the customer wants it to be available, right? They want it to work, right? And then if it's not working, they want it to be supported. They want somebody to call and they'll answer the phone to help them, and they want it to be secure, right? And so those were the three. I'm like, don't overcomplicate what we sell. At the end of the day, when they double click Microsoft, Office thing, they want it to work. And if it doesn't work, they want someone to call, and then they want to make sure that their thing is secure. And so that was our pitch, that we sell ass.
Well,
That's
I was
all.
going to say, if that's the only bad word said on this webinar, then I did really good because I'm known for having a potty mouth. So
A win is a win. And nobody
So
will
it
forget
was,
that. Great
I always
sales.
said that as like a joke, but it actually was memorable enough that the sellers remembered it. It's like, this is a fairly simple thing we're selling. Don't overcomplicate it, because your end users don't care, right? They just want it to work. They want to call somebody if it doesn't, and they want it to be secure. So keep it simple.
That's awesome.
Well, I think we're at time, Andy. Hey,
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to share, we just have a couple QR codes so I can share those
yeah.
out to everyone. I don't know if everyone can see my screen, hopefully.
Mhm.
But yeah, we just want to thank Jennifer and Carl for getting on today. This, I think, was a great conversation. I hope it was beneficial for everyone that was here, and Dave as well from Lion Guard for getting on with me and just yapping for an hour. Having
Well,
some
no,
good.
Carl and Jennifer, you guys are great. It's impressive what y'all have built over there. And, I think the technology piece sometimes is kind of easy. It's the culture piece that's hard. And it sounds like you guys have really licked that part. So props to you guys for what y'all have built and continue to build.
well, thanks so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you guys are great. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Mandy.
Bye, everybody.